I dedicated my business to the Lord. But then an interesting thing happened. My business dried up after dedicating the business to the Lord.
Oh,
I
wow.
always thought,
Okay.
well, that's an interesting recruiting method, Lord. And I didn't have a clear path for how to grow the business with God. And of course, God knew
Mm.
that. So what happened is in drying up the business, yeah, I lost. We had a staff of probably 15 at that time. I even had my wife who was helping with accounting. I had to lay her off. I mean, I could have worked at McDonald's and made more money, truthfully, through that whole period.
Welcome to the Shifan Show. This episode is brought to you by the Prosperum Publishing System. For thought leaders and content creators looking to build lasting value, this publishing system transforms your expertise into evergreen digital products and assets. With business systems that work independently from social platforms and algorithm changes, this performance-based model is all about turning valuable content into sustainable enterprise value without relying on social media platforms. Details in the show notes below. But let's dive into today's episode. Today, I'm very excited to have James Barthel, who is a growth leadership coach, entrepreneur, and author of Thou Shall Grow. After overcoming early business failures and a $300,000 in debt, he's built and exited a national 8-figure company. And today, he helps leaders combine faith and business through the integrated faith business framework to scale with clarity, purpose, with a kingdom impact. Welcome, James.
Oh, well, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you.
That's very exciting, actually. And it's quite nice to have a kingdom-led entrepreneur and founder on the podcast there as well. I think because this podcast focuses more on like founders and business owners who are doing things a little bit differently in the industries, but it's never smooth sailing. So I'd love to hear, I guess, about your journey, how you overcame that 300K in debt to where you're at right now.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's kind of a cool story in the fact that I thought I was primarily writing a business book after my 20 years of entrepreneurial experience and then, 15 years of corporate experience before that. But really what it became is a spiritual book that integrates business, together. And
Mm.
kind of the background of how I even came to writing the book is I finally achieved my dream. I'd sold my business, the two businesses, to a private equity firm after growing it and scaling it, right? And I thought,
Yeah.
well, I've kept good notes, I had good stories to tell, and I'd just write my book. But an interesting thing happened after about 3, 4 months of really enjoying life for the first time without any pressures, any worries. I know we all think about that as a business leader, and it was
Mm.
pretty glorious for about 3, 4 months, lots of golf and everything. But all of a sudden, my wife came down with a life threatening cancer. And that really shook us to our core. We shared that experience with others because we felt that the Lord, wanted to do something with that. And over a period of time where you start to figure out, what the cancer is and other things. And then we finally, identified a treatment for this very
Mm.
rare form of cancer is my wife really grew in her faith. And she was pretty faithful before, but man, she became so intimate with the Father. And then what I noticed too is that as we had shared this experience with many others all over the globe, including in Australia and Africa, other places, people were regularly praying for her,
Mm.
and she could feel that. She could feel people's prayers and she could, as she grew closer to the Lord. And then one day out on our deck, as she was praying as she always did with the Lord, especially in the morning, the Lord spoke to her in a very clear voice. And he told
Wow.
her, daughter, you don't need to pray anymore. You've been healed. The next, I think it was maybe
Wow.
a couple days later, we went to the oncologist and had had a PET scan. And miraculously, this 10 centimeter mass was gone within two
Wow.
weeks.
Praise
And this
God.
guy is a world class oncologist. He said, I really didn't expect that. So, what that really stirred up in me is the fact that faith is such an important part of who we are and how we go about life. And so I made a commitment that day to write God's book and to do it
Mm.
as long as it took to get his concepts in. And fast forward, it was 3 years later of every day walking up my mountain that I live on and asking God what he wanted me to write. And what I realized is that my own path and my own business journey and faith journey mirrors kind of a pattern, a growth pattern that is contained within the Bible and actually is also part of some standard business teachings, which makes
Mm,
sense because God is in everything. And
mm.
when we find what works, then we stick with it and we're able to prosper. So the book is very much about my own personal journey and stories about how I grew and how to really, it's about how to accelerate your personal faith growth journey in a business setting and how to scale your business, without getting lost, without, taking too long. It helps business leaders in any kind of business accelerate their journey with faith.
Nah, I love that. And thank you for sharing. I think testimonials always wonderful to hear that, especially what's happened to your wife. I think that's awesome
Yeah.
actually. I love that. I love that. Um, do you mind sharing as well, like the two businesses that you exited and sold, like what was the, I guess, the market were you in or what industry were you in for those
We were
businesses?
in law enforcement, military. It was a quasi environmental and security based business.
Mm,
The environmental aspect of it is that I had identified and actually have about a dozen patents, including in Australia,
wow.
for how you deal with lead in the environment. And lead's the most prominent pollutant in our soil, in the environment, in any place in the world. And so what we found, and there's a story behind that I'd like to share, as far how God directed us to that niche, because it was clearly God's niche. But this business involved working for facility owners and developers that would
Mm,
take properties and redevelop them, for new uses. But our primary clients really were we worked for pretty much every law enforcement or major law enforcement organization in the United States. We worked for every branch of the military. We worked at the U.S. Capitol building. We worked for the FBI. We were the FBI's go-to contractor. But we also worked for Fortune 200 corporations
wow.
that had properties they wanted to redevelop, as well as for small private enterprises. So it was a pretty broad variety, and it involved environmental, and then eventually it became a turnkey solution for live fire firing ranges. And if you think about firing ranges, every city, including in Australia, with security forces, they're training at these firing ranges. There's also recreational firing ranges, military firing ranges. And what I found is that it was a huge unmet market. And we were able to use our prior experiences and technologies to serve that market and to scale it. I mean, like I said, we started with one line of business. And by the time we scaled and sold, we had probably about 20 lines of business.
Amazing, amazing. And so take me through your journey, if you can share of when you went into like debt and struggling, like was there a moment where you had some sort of like idea from God to do that turnaround, like the 180-degree turnaround to be able to profitably sell your business? Like what was that? What was happening for you that time, basically, mentally and spiritually?
Yeah. I mean, those are testing times, right? And we all kind of have those. I found myself $300,000 in debt, no way out, raising a family. I had several children in college. I tried to find, work after the business turned down. What was really surprising about it is when I started my entrepreneurial business, I had gotten burned out in the corporate world and really
Mm,
lost my way. I wasn't living any degree of faith that I had as a child, and pretty soon, not only was I burned out, but I had burned out my family and ended up,
wow.
sadly, getting divorced. But I made a commitment after that to not leave my faith out. So I started an entrepreneurial business. I said, I got to bring faith into the business. How do you do that? I didn't know anyone that really had done that. And so I began a experience of learning and seeking and actually hiring a person to help me out. And what happened is within a couple of years after reading some books, I dedicated my business to the Lord. Maybe you've done that. Maybe others have done that. But then an interesting thing happened. My business dried up after dedicating the business to the Lord.
Oh
I
wow.
always thought,
Okay.
well, that's an interesting recruiting method, Lord. But here's here's the point, and we'll go on more with that, is I wasn't ready. Even though I had a desire to integrate faith into my business, I personally wasn't ready, and I didn't have a clear path for how to grow the business with God. And of course, God knew
Mm.
that. So what happened is in drying up the business, yeah, I lost. We had a staff of probably 15 at that time. I even had my wife who was helping with accounting. I had to lay her off. I mean, I could have worked at McDonald's and made more money, truthfully, through that whole period. But the Lord was working on my character and he was drawing me closer to him. And here is the really cool thing. In that period, as our business started to go down, you're not going to believe this. The Lord orchestrated for the Israeli Ministry of Environment to reach out to us, to me, to help come up with a cleanup plan for a biblical river, the biblical river that Jesus would have put his feet in as a child, the Kishon River. And so I would
Wow.
go to Israel and I'd use my saved up points from travel, and stuff because I didn't have much money at that time. And I would go for business and I'd meet the government officials and help with the cleanup. But really, I was on my own spiritual journey. And here is the turning point. The turning point came as I would rent a car and I'd go to, Jerusalem or the Sea of Galilee. And drove to the Sea of Galilee one day and it was on a Shabbat, so nobody else was driving. I probably could have gotten in trouble, but they let me go. Uh, but I was at the Sea of Galilee below Mount of Beatitudes, and you've seen pictures of it, the Mount of Beatitudes behind it, and there's a creek
Mm.
that flows down from the Galilean hills into the Sea of Galilee, which is almost assuredly the point where the resurrected Jesus met with his disciples and called out to Peter. And as I was reading that scripture in Luke, I felt that the Lord spoke to me and said, it was time that, yeah, you've been out fishing all night and you haven't caught anything. It's time for you to recast your nets out in faith. And so prophetically, I took my hands and I threw my net over and said, okay, Lord, teach me how to catch fish.
Mm.
And I felt there was a spiritual breakthrough at that point. After I returned back home a couple months later, all of a sudden I started to see the new niche that we had, messed around in, but we really hadn't put it a focus. And that was these firing ranges that were all over the country, over 10,000 of them. And I started to realize is we had the perfect technology, the perfect experience, the perfect credentials, and there was nobody else doing what that we were called to do. And so we made a commitment that we were going to make that a primary focus. And people are like, "Oh, that's great! You found this niche." Like, wasn't I didn't find a niche. I stumbled
Mm.
into it. God showed me the niche, and God wants to show you a niche,
Exactly.
and He wants to show, your listeners and the people who are seeking Him what He wants them to do. And so, what would happen over the next 3 to 4 months, and then for the next year, is we started to see new opportunities. We started bidding, submitting prices on these new opportunities. We went almost an entire year without losing a bid. We went from
Wow.
no business to never losing anything. And we found this new niche, which we would then scale. But it was also showing me a path forward that I hadn't seen before.
Okay, that's a lot to unpack there because this is something definitely God's hands over that as well. Because, like, funny enough, we in Perth, we had a church conference with all the men in our church,
Yeah.
and we had a guest speaker named Dr. Leif Hedlund, I think all the way from Norway, so a very good, strong accent there. He's done a lot of wonderful things, but he spoke about, as Christians, there's two buckets or two chairs we tend to fall into. The first one is that we do believe we're safe, we're going to heaven, but we still live in a performance-based lifestyle. We must grind it out. We must hustle hard. Like, um, I'm scared to trust God, my business or my life, my family, or whatever it is, right? And then the second bucket or second chair is the person's living in the finished work of the cross, in the freedom of Christ, that he looks after you as a father looks after the child. So, like, I even had a friend of mine who came to the conference and he and I caught up a coffee about 2 weeks ago, is asking, what do I need to do? Is there, I think he's trying to ask, is there like a formula or is there we need to do to position ourselves? Like, do you have any like wisdom to share of your journey or what you've seen over the years of how to, I guess, not have a formula to
get God to give you what you want in your business or financially, because it sounds wrong. That sounds like manipulating a vending machine. But any words of wisdom or experience about like how do you, I guess, surrender to that and let God guide you?
Yeah, well, I believe that what the Lord showed me through all this time, and what I also experienced, is that there are growth horizons. That we all go through growth horizons. Jesus went through a growth horizon. Jesus,
Yeah.
wasn't full in his authority when he was born. He grew through it, even though he was fully man and fully God.
Mm,
But there are standard patterns. There are seasons. There are growth patterns. If you look at your education, maybe you start out in a kindergarten or early education. Then there's middle school and grammar school, and then there's high school. In college, there's bachelor's, master's, and doctorates. And in crafts, there are three levels, and three is the spiritual number for perfection, completion.
mm,
So what I discovered is that there are three growth horizons associated with our own spiritual walk. And Jesus demonstrated that with the growth of his disciples that we can speak about. But there are three growth horizons for every business. And I have an MBA as well as an engineering degree from a major university here. Is that when you study business, there are 5 stages that every business goes through. But in those 5 stages, they really fall into three categories. There's startup
yeah.
and survival. There's success. And then if you stay focused and committed, there's maturity and scaling. So they
Yeah.
fall into three buckets, if you would. Maybe, I don't know about the two buckets, but in our spiritual walk, but also in our leadership. You see, when most of us start a business or we become involved in a startup business, we're usually there because we're gifted with a skill set. Maybe we're gifted in plumbing, or we're gifted in electronics or programming or whatever. But normally, our leadership is not where it needs to be as far as managing a business and then becoming a leader. So, the three levels that I see in leadership that we have to work on, that God wants us to work on, is to move from being a manager and know it, being the center point for everything and having to know
Mm,
everything, to becoming, a strategic leader. And that's normally what I help coach other business leaders on, is that if you want to grow from just barely surviving, or maybe you're just starting up, you've got to increase your business mastery and your leadership knowledge to be able to be a strategic leader. And that takes time. And throughout the whole book, what I've done is figure out the inspiration, the relevance, and then application. And in fact, in Thou Shall Grow, there are 3 chapters for each of the growth horizons. And guess what? The first chapter gives you the inspiration, the spiritual aspects of it. The
okay.
second chapter gives you the relevance of how it applies to business. And the third chapter is full of how you apply that in business. So to go back to leadership, you start as a manager, technical manager, you advance to a strategic leader. But a strategic leader alone cannot get to the maturity and scaling, because it's not about you and I. It's about the
Mm,
team we lead and the people underneath us, and how we inspire them and teach them, how to do good business with God. And ultimately, we need to become leaders of leaders. And if we are to prepare to scale and to multiply, then we need to become better leaders of leaders, spiritually, in our spiritual growth, in our business mastery, and in our leadership. And when all those three things become in alignment, not just being a good Christian in business, like you said, was the first part. I found that there's three horizons. Is many of us start as being a good Christian in business. We're trying to figure out how to do that.
yeah.
The second one is we get on fire for God and we do it for God. And we're very generous with our checks and we're very kind with our people. But there's another level. And it's not that we give up those other levels, the 2 levels before that, but the highest level is to do business with God, where we allow
Mm,
him to direct our paths, where we seek him with all our heart, mind, and soul, and that he then makes our paths straight. So I really take leaders through each of those growth levels so that they can become a leader of leaders. They can multiply Jesus's kingdom Because when we look at the parables of the 30 and 60 and 90 multiplication, everything that Jesus is involved with multiplies. If
Mm.
we want to be part of his plan for multiplication, then we need to prepare in advance to do it his way, which is the natural way. See, I'm going to close with this thought. Think about this is if we do business as a good Christian in business, we're still doing it the world's way, the unnatural way, because we've been changed. We've been transformed. We are a Christian. We are no longer of this world. We are in the world. If we're to do business God's way, we need to transform and invite him into everything we do, not only for ourselves, but for the organization. That's what this lays you out. It carries you through each of the levels, gives you inspiration, relevance, and actual application.
You mentioned that, being good Christians in business, there's still a lot of things that we follow in a secular world. The world says you got to keep working. Some people are very successful, guys like Elon Musk or the one that passed away, Steve Jobs, they work like nonstop, of course,
Right.
in sacrificing their family, their health and everything there as well. And even the term surrender sounds very counterintuitive for the secular world. So how do you help good Christians in business not get, you know, I guess lukewarm, having one foot into the business world, which is secular world, also trying to keep the other foot as a Christian? How do you help them? What's the word I'm looking for? Like let go of that inner turmoil, like which way do I take it, and how you help them surrender there. So because sometimes, like for myself, I had 2025 as a year for me to rest after a bit of a fall on business. And for the longest time, 2025, I was, and a few other friends of mine were like, what do we do next? We're waiting on God, but it feels like everybody's going by. My bank account has hit like a certain point. I feel lost. People are counting on me, etc. But yet the year went by, only things started picking up in 2026. So I guess my question is to you, how do you help Christians who are in business fully surrender without having that worry of what the secular world's going to think about them or influence them in that sense?
That's so good. That's so good. I think I want to address that specifically, but I think to help with that, I mean, the real simple answer is on my website. There's an assessment that anyone can take.
Okay.
And within less than 10 minutes, it'll help you identify where you are in your spiritual growth, where you are in your business mastery and your business's growth, and where you are in your leadership growth. Because really, to know what to do next, you have to know where you are. But
Mm,
in and we can it's at jamesmbarthel.com. You can email me at james@jamesmbarthel.com. I'd be happy to send you the link and everything. And it gives you an output that is a growth wheel that shows you in 9 essential areas where you are, where you're strong, and where you may need work. And then it also gives you feedback as to what steps you can take right away. So my first answer is take the assessment so you know where you are. However, in general, the first horizon is really important, and many of us skip through the first horizon. The first horizon is where we start to identify what are the true values that we bring forth in our lives into business. It identifies what our purpose is and what the purpose of the business is. It identifies, what is our unique value proposition that we bring forth that is a benefit to all of our stakeholders, to our customers for sure, but also to our employees, to the owners, and to our business partners, banks, bond companies, whoever you might need to partner with. See, what I believe is that if we're going to be on a stable growth platform, then our business needs to be a blessing to all four of those stakeholder groups. Some would add community as well, which is I think is important. It could be a fifth
mm,
stakeholder group. But generally, and I did it, and people I coach at this level, I'm telling you, they struggle with taking the time to write down 5 or 7 key values that they want their business to live out. And if you can't do it when there's only you or maybe a couple people, then you'll never be able to do it when you're 100 people. And
right.
God wants us to have a firm spiritual foundation, a firm foundation of faith. So write down 5 to 7 key values. Read my book, read other books to give ideas what those values are. Identify what your purpose of your business is. I coach people in the automotive business, in the accounting business, and real estate and others. There's always a higher purpose for a business. For instance, automobiles. If you're working on automobiles, an automobile is not just a metal box with four wheels. An automobile is the vehicle of how you go about fulfilling your calling. So if you're a mother and you have children, your calling is to raise
Mm,
those children. If you're in business and you need to travel to work, or travel to meet clients, it's your form of mode of transportation. It's so much more important than just the fact that you're putting gas in your car. Accountants, you're really not just crunching numbers and overseeing and teaching your clients how to do it. You're providing quality assurance and ensuring that there's integrity and honesty in those numbers and helping your clients do that. So there's always a higher purpose. And then lastly, I'll just say is that so many people start a business, but they can't articulate clearly what is unique about their business. What's the unique value proposition that you're bringing to your customers? Because if you can't identify yet your unique value proposition, your
mm,
messaging, your marketing, you could put all kinds of social media ads out there or whatever you want to do, as far as getting the word out. But unless you're clear on what the unique value proposition you bring forth, is your customers confused, you're confused, and you don't have a firm foundation, and you won't know what to pray about. So, lastly, how do we align more with God? Is we're intentional about setting time aside, praying with God. And then as we grow, we bring prayer actually into the business. And I detail numerous ways of progressively how you do that. And you don't have to do it all at once. You can do it step by step. But the first key to success, getting away from survival mode and getting
mm.
into continuous success, is building a firm foundation of faith, leadership, and business mastery.
Wow, this is good. This is like a sermon, but also like a seminar in itself. This is wonderful, actually. Because I think sometimes, I think we try to put things in boxes, right? Especially running a business, everything's busy, especially, it's a bit chaotic at the start. Like a lot, sometimes I speak to people, and myself included, back in a few years ago, it's like, how, like, I'm so busy already. Like, I don't have time to just, like, one of my good friends, he said, how about spend 2 days in a weekend just with nothing, no phone, no laptop, whatever it is. But sometimes you got deadlines due or things are happening. Like a lot of people find it very hard to incorporate that quiet and rest in God. Like any words or any like thoughts on that, like for those who are very busy or feel like they have no time to put aside um like quiet time or like the secret place with God and all that kind of things there.
Yeah, I think to start is I would do it in the morning. And many
Uh
people recommend you doing it in the morning before the chaos, before I pick up my phone, start reading the news or check my
mm,
emails or whatever. I think, and you can start with even 15 minutes, get a Bible study program, go through my book or somebody else's book and, just read little couple pages at a time and then ask God to show you what's going on. And then what would happen to me is at the end of the day, there would be times where I knew I was kind of a mess, because
mm,
eh, that's why faith in business is so important. Because man, the marketplace is the perfect place for faith because we're constantly under struggle and under attack and have challenges, right? And God knows
mm,
that. By the way, He's the one who created the marketplace. He's the one who created trade and commerce as part of our life here. So, business is and commerce is God's design. So of course we need faith in order to do it. So morning, and then what I would do too is in the evenings, if there were big decisions, I would just go for a hike. I mean, I think many of us hear God very well in nature. Not
uh,
everyone, but a lot of people I know, find that they hear God in doing something in nature, running, fishing, I don't know, hiking, whatever it is. But that's certainly the case for me. I reveal several incredible insights that God gave me as I was out in nature. And yeah.
okay, yeah, have more quiet, more purposeful quiet time. Yeah, it's actually really interesting because like sometimes the days where not just myself, but some of my friends in the well, Christians, also business owners, or very high in their careers, they feel like the days where they feel like they're losing ground, not doing as much as they think they should be, actually get the best insights once they actually spend some time with God and the Word. You know what I mean? Like again, there's no formula, but that's a very key thing, just spending time with God. And
Yeah.
the world or your people around me say like, "What are you doing? You know, wasting 8 hours of doing nothing on a Saturday when you could be working or whatnot." But yeah, again, God moves beyond how we think, how the world thinks, and everything there as
Yeah,
well.
yeah. Well, and huge breakthroughs. It's by far the best thing you could do with your time if you invite God in to help, run the business and give you insight. I share in my book where in a episode like that, I hiked the mountain and then, I went to bed and the Lord, I would sometimes get dreams. And if you get
Mm,
dreams, some people get dreams, some people don't get dreams.
yeah,
If you do get dreams, I can tell you this, write them down. And, some of them aren't going to make any sense, fine. But some, you'll start to see a pattern. I started to see a pattern in which how God was communicating with me using things that I was familiar with. He doesn't come in and like give you biblical images. I find he relates and he gives you images, that are related to what and what you're involved with. But anyways, on this hike, I went up, I came down, and then in this dream, the Lord gave me an insight on this work we were going to subcontract out. It was over $1 million, like a couple $1 million worth of work. And I had just gotten a proposal from them that didn't feel right. And I just knew based on the dream that I wasn't to go with them. And instead, we did the work ourselves, which we had never done before. It was dredging out these lakes. And we were able to put together a team to do that. And immediately, as we began the work, I began to see that the conditions where they proposed that would kick in these huge change orders existed. But then as we did the work, I found it didn't matter. It didn't add any cost. So that they were being deceitful, knowing that there were some underlying soil conditions, uneven ground underneath the water,
mm,
and they just threw that in to help make more profit for them. So since we did the work, we found that right away and it cost us nothing extra. But out of that, and I call it, I forget the exact title in the book, but it was my $1 million moment. So what happened is we made an extra $1 million on that project just based on the insight that the Lord had given me.
amazing. Christian entrepreneur, business person, or somebody maybe quite involved in a career. How do they test to know that what has been given to them is from God? You know, like I think sometimes you can get dreams, you keep it to yourself. Sometimes you go to a pastor or go to a confidant, but there's still that kind of sense of like, how do I know this is actually from God? Like
Yeah.
a peace that comes with it. Like any insights you want to share on that one?
Well, I think you got to look at it near term and long term. In the long term, what you want to do is write it down and keep a journal and then pray
Mm,
about it. Right. And then over time, you'll see how God gave you an insight and how it played out, and you'll see the pattern. Now, in the near term, which is really more your question, what I do is, again, I'll write it down and then I'll pray about it. And then I'll have my antenna up and I'll look for what's going on around me to see if this applies. And most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, all of a sudden somebody will come into your office and say, "Ian, hey, I got this great idea," and it's like, "Ooh, that's what God was kind of telling me," right?
right.
But occasionally it won't. But if you write it down, see, it's not John 17:4. You gotta read John 17:4. John
I look
seventeen
at it.
four. Jesus says, "This is eternal life." Our purpose, your purpose, my purpose on earth. John 17:4. Now I love John 3:16 that Jesus brings us eternal life. But
Mm,
John 17:4 defines what eternal life is. It is to know the Father and the one he sent. Our life purpose here is to know God and to know Jesus more and more intimately. So don't just look at it as a one time thing. This is a lifelong journey of knowing Him, knowing His ways, and then reflecting that into this natural growth that we have. And There's in church, they call it sanctification. What
Mm,
is sanctification? Sanctification is we become more Christ-like. How do we become more Christ-like? We're filled with his Holy Spirit and we behave now in ways that are consistent with his ways, and then we help others to do likewise. What better place is there than the marketplace to do that? And you don't have to
mm,
be a pastor. If you are, that's great. You don't even have to, be an expert in the Bible yet. I think it's starting where you are and just slowly but surely spending more time with God, reading more of his word, applying more of it, because we know, think about this as in some of the teachings I do, is that the best way to know something and to grow in it, for instance, if you're a golfer, the best way to get better at golf is to teach somebody else the golf stroke and how to get better. The best
mm.
way to grow spiritually is to apply what you read. And you don't have to be perfect at it because none of us are. But by applying it and learning it, we become more and more of an expert, more knowledgeable. We can teach more people that way. So just begin where you are. The key is just begin where you are. It doesn't matter. Maybe you've never even opened the Bible before. Get an app. Just do a
Mm.
daily app reading of key scriptures. Just begin doing something and then grow with it and keep growing.
I love that. It's a good reminder there as well. I think even a lot of us, we can fall into periods where we want the answer right away. And then once we're done with the answer, we got the answer, we kind of like forget like how we actually achieve the answer by, by spending time with God. You know what I mean? So, um, very cool, actually. It's very cool. Um, I do have another question. Something I think, you probably come across a lot of people battle with is the idea of like when I build my business or start to scale my company, how do you feel towards like money itself? Are we accidentally fall into a love for money, that kind of thing? You know what I mean? In terms of like people feel like, if I grow my company too big, I might be choosing the love of money instead of love of God. Do you have
Right.
any like thoughts on that, or how helping like maybe like Christian business people, entrepreneurs, like overcome that barrier in their mind, in their heart as well, without feeling like they're like losing their soul in that sense?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, right, right, right. We don't wanna prosper and lose our soul for sure.
Exactly.
I would say that there's 2 partial answers to that. One involves value, the other involves your purpose and your reason. And that's why that first horizon is so important. Because when we started our business, we started it with the goal of growing it and then selling it and then using the money to do good things. But the Lord quickly got a hold of us, me, and showed me that that's not the purpose. The purpose for your business and the purpose for your leadership is how you meet the needs of others through doing good deeds. That's what Jesus did. That's what he teaches us to do. And business is the perfect mountain, if you would, for meeting needs. Because if you're not meeting the needs of your stakeholders, then you're not going to have a business for very long and you're not going to prosper. So, one of the
Mm,
first things that you can do to help make sure you're aligned with God's purposes and not chasing mammon is to
mm,
be aligned with what's your purpose and why are you doing it. If I'm focused on meeting the needs of others and serving them at a higher level that glorifies God, then my motivation, how I get up every day, is not based on my love of money. It's based on my love for God and what He calls me to do. So your why in that first horizon becomes vital. Because otherwise, once you
wow.
get to continuous success, so here's the trapping that's based on the parable of the sower in the second horizon. Once you get to continuous success, the parable of the sower says that it is the complacency, it is the love of money and the love of comfort that keeps you from growing. So there may be listeners today that have achieved a level of continuous success, but God is saying it was never about your comfort. It was never about your success. It was about the purpose of glorifying my name and helping others to know me and to meet the needs of others. So
Mm,
once we're aligned to in the beginning, then we will grow. I mean, the Bible, Jesus teaches us, 30, 60, 90 is we are a good steward according to the parable of the talents. As we
yep.
seek his purposes according to the parable of the sower, that yes, we're going to grow. And so it's about why you're doing these things and then growing into your own stewardship. And then, of course, being generous with what we have, which is meeting the needs of others. A lot of it comes down to why. And I want to just close with value. You see, in order to meet the needs of others, we should focus on the value of what we're offering. What value do we bring? Instead
Mm,
of multiplying, first and foremost, how I can make the most amount of money, in the littlest amount of work by manipulating price or manipulating clients or, these other things that we have a tendency to do, but focus on the creation of value and communicate that with your team that, listen, we are about creating the highest value that we bring to our customers. And we all know that money chases value. We don't want
mm.
to chase money, but money will follow value. And if we're properly foundational aligned with God, then of course he's going to give you more. And God intends to give you more than you can hope or imagine is what he talks about. Jeremiah, I have a plan for you. But what we do is we get off base because we haven't aligned in the beginning, or we haven't grown in being a good steward of what he's given us from the standpoint of mastering business. Let me just close with the fact that we see all these sports heroes, especially in the United States, but other places, that have faith and they have a platform and they win a Super Bowl or they win, a soccer match and then they share about their faith. Well, what
Mm.
gave them that platform is the mastery and what God gave them to do. They would not have that platform to be able to talk about their faith if they weren't good in the sport or the chef being the best cook or whatever. We as business people have to master business, but we master it in a way that's aligned with God's purposes. Some will go so far as they'll start following God, but they haven't mastered what allows them to be a good steward of the business that God's given you.
So true. So true. Nah, I love that part as well. I think in the day it's like similar to the talents, right? God said to like multiply it, not just keep it dormant, like the guy who got only the one talent. Like he
Yeah.
trusted the master, but he still just kept it hidden because he's like either lazy or scared the master from like finding out, etc. Um, but that's so true actually. You gotta master that as well. I do have one final question. So respect your title, James. Is I think in the very beginning you talk about a lot about alignment and putting and spending time with God there as well. In the Proverbs it says, I think it's Proverbs like without vision the people will perish.
Right.
And so I think for a lot of business owners, they want to ensure that the vision they have is from God. And you mentioned a little bit that before to spend time, go on hikes, spend time in nature, have some quiet time there as well. But do you have any sort of like maybe you have outlined in your book, but do you have any sort of like I guess um, practices that you teach your clients how to design a vision that where they actually can say, I surrender this to God, who's my CEO of my business, who's the founder of my business, ensuring that on the right path and they don't feel like they're I think what people get concerned, especially in business as Christians, like they feel like, am I really doing this God's way? Um, do you have any like sort of like I guess input there, any like practices you could share for our listeners that how to make sure they do it the right way for the vision, for the business, for the life, according to Christ Himself?
Yeah, I mean, that's really a good one. Good question. We've kind of talked
Yeah.
around that a little bit. Again, I think it comes down to the business you have. How does it serve others? What
Okay.
unique way does it serve others? And then what unique value? You have to have a differentiator. There has to be something about what you're doing that, competes with the other noise that's out there.
Of course.
And those would be the first two things to work at is, what's that unique purpose and what are we going to do that's over the top? And it begins by here's one practice you can do. Take the four stakeholders, the owners, the customers, your employees, and then your partners. Write down three specific needs for each group. You'd be amazed how many business leaders couldn't even articulate what the basic needs of those three stakeholder groups are. And if you want to carry it one step further, write down the three needs of your employees. They have a need for respect. They have a need for, fair compensation. They have a need for career advancement. I mean, you
Yeah.
could do five. I tend to do five, but if you're just starting, you could do three. Well, then write down, how do we go over and above meeting their needs? For customers, as an example, what we would do is they had a need for fulfilling the contract. You'd be surprised how many businesses don't even fulfill what they sold, the client
Mm.
to do. But what I instructed our guys to do is, then when you're there, go over and above. So if we have equipment on site and they need a little bit of work done, go do the work for them. Who cares if it takes a couple of hours?
Yeah.
Or if it has features on a product, we'll give them an extra couple features. And again, it probably doesn't cost you almost anything. And you'd be amazed at how many people respond, well, I know I do. If I buy something and what I buy exceeds what my expectations are or what I thought I was buying, I mean, I loved that product and I loved that company. So focus
Mm.
on the needs and the deeds, simple exercise, write them down in a matrix, and you'd be amazed at how much clarity that it gives you and how much confidence. Think about this. I'll close with this. My
Mm.
employees knew, because I would express to them and tell them what I was doing with this matrix, that I was looking out for your needs that you didn't even have to communicate. I spent time in prayer thinking about the needs that my employees had. And I would tell them that. And then occasionally I would do some things, to go over and above what. And then they have this confidence like, oh, wait a minute. All my needs are going to be looked after. Now I can help go look after the needs of our clients. What about the needs of the owners? The owners have needs. And as we have this dialogue, that my employees started to think through is, oh, wait a minute. How do I help meet the needs of the owners more? Because if their needs are met, then they can meet my needs more. So all of a sudden, we have this great servant leadership,
Mm.
actual business operating in our midst.
Wow, that's actually really good. Man, like, I think a lot of times when you hear this kind of stuff to go like over and above, sometimes people feel like, am I being taken advantage of? Am I giving up more than I'm receiving kind of thing, right? But in our case as Christians, we know that God provides more, goes all, he's the one who went way above what we require to love on us and save us from, from hell and everything there as well. So I think we have that confidence there to give more because we know that God's going to provide for us as well. I think sometimes, you hear from the secular world that people get too caught up like, oh, if I give too much, I'm losing money. I'm going to be, um, you know, I'm going to lose a lot revenue because of doing this extra stuff for like customers or clients and everything there. But that's really good. That's actually really, really good. But thank you so much, James, for your time. Where's the best place people can find you or connect with you if they want to like reach out to you?
Yeah. So my website is jamesmbarthel.com. And if you want to buy Thou Shall Grow, it's on Amazon. The audiobook's on Kindle. You can enter Thou Shall Grow, or you can enter my name, James M. Barthel, and
Sure.
hopefully you'll pick up a copy of the book. I think it's going to be a blessing for you.
Thank you so much. I definitely put those links in the show notes. Thanks a lot, James. Really appreciate you coming on the podcast. And wishing you a blessed one for the next part of your season as well.
Thank you, Ian. Appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning to the Shifan Show, turning expertise into evergreen digital assets that work independently from social media platforms. You can find out more with the Prosperity publishing system that does this exactly in the details and the show notes below. See you next time.